Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Wise. I'm a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan, and I am the student lead for the Building a Dynasties panel. I have the distinct honor and privilege of introducing our panelists tonight. We have Jonathan Kraft, who is the president of the Kraft Group, which is an international holding company whose assets include the New England Patriots and the New England Revolution. Next, we have Phil Jackson, a champion as both a player and a coach, an award-winning author, and an overall legend in American sports. This panel will be moderated by Jackie McMullen from ESPN, and it will run until 6 p.m. Now, there are a couple ways for you guys to ask questions. The first is just to text your question to the number 22333, and be sure to put the word Dynasties before your question. Or you can send a tweet to @poll and make sure you start your question with Dynasties, and that's how you'll ask questions. I just want to remind you to please join us after the panel for our cocktail reception in the Boylston hallway presented by SAS. And I'll leave it to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome, everybody. Should be a fun panel this evening. I have one panelist I can already see cringing a little bit at the word dynasty, so we'll get to that in a minute. You're not cringing, Phil, which is good.
Heavy topic, that's for sure.
Yes, it is. So, championships with the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, 5 more championships with the Lakers. So the one constant there is you and also the triangle offense. So I'm guessing that before analytics, there was the triangle offense, but I imagine there's an analytical component to that maybe you can share with us.
The analytics now is offensive efficiency rating, OER. At the time, we had my mentor and assistant, Tex Winter, who was an irritant sitting next to me on the bench. Actually, he sat next to the trainer and rode on his leg most of the time. But he would write down every possession. So in a quarter, first quarters, you have 27, maybe 28 possessions. He could describe every offensive possession that we had and then give a kind of a running commentary on our opponents. 15-foot jump, layup, put back, offensive rebound. Free throws, he would circle and have 2 circles and then 1 miss and 1 made. But at a timeout sequence, when I went out onto the floor, I'd say, Tex, how we doing so far? We'd know the score, but he'd say, we're 4 for 8, and we haven't run the corner series yet, or we haven't run a certain part of our offense yet. We still need to figure that out, and our opponent's been getting these 15-foot jumpers at the elbow. So yes, we had an efficiency. At the end of the quarter, he'd tally it up, and we'd be, 15 for 28 or 15 for 27. Interestingly enough, those numbers come down significantly the rest of the game. Sometimes to 22 in the second quarter, might go up 25 in the third, and maybe 17 or 18 in the fourth quarter. So those things change in the course of the game. However, when we went to film study the next morning, he would bring the sheets in, and when we played the team again, later on the month or sometime during the season, we'd have those sheets where we could go through the sheets, analyze what had happened before, what was successful and what wasn't in our scouting or our preparation for another team.
Okay, but the triangle offense, to me, it was successful because of the spacing, because it didn't feature one particular player necessarily. It could evolve into a 2-man game, which it did occasionally for you. But it was all the things that I think today's analytics stresses. Movement, and the way you play defense too, I feel, same kind of thing. So I wonder when you see all the things in front of you today, they have sport view. They now have a camera in every arena, so you can mark every single movement of every player. What do you make of that?
Well, I think there's a lot of designated roles right now in NBA basketball. We have our screeners, and we have our pick and pop guys, we have our pick and roll guys or dive guys. We have a lot of guys hanging out in the corner. So there's not a lot of movement. A lot of times the game doesn't start from passes, which, normally in an offensive sequence in the sideline triangle, we'd start out with a pass. We'd start out a pass to be an entrance pass, and the next pass was what we called a sequential pass. And in that pass, we had designated motion from that pass. It wasn't a play set, but there are activities from a pass. You could also activate it from a dribble. So there were those advances. But literally, the game is kind of turned upside down from the triangle or from the sideline triangle that I ran, and is now much more about initiating offense off the move, off the dribble, and activating players from that.
Right. So the one thing that the two dynasties we have in common here is you had the same coach, Jonathan, for all three of the championships the Patriots won. You also had the same ownership. And I wonder how important you think that is to have that kind of consistency and to have a leader, a great coach, to carry you through.
I want to be clear. Phil has been a part of two dynasties and the architect of two. The Patriots, to my mind, haven't experienced a dynasty. I think it's not we're not anywhere near the same galaxy. I do think that consistency in an organization is critical. If you want to have a chance to have success, you have to have consistency, and it's consistency at the top management level, at the ownership level, but really the coach, I think, very much needs to build around a core group of key players who you know are going to be there for more than a year or two. I think without that, a coach and a core group that he can rely on, I think the chances of being successful are probably pretty slim.
So we were talking before we came out here about applying analytics to football and how, because there's 11 players there and because everything must be done in concert, if your offensive guard, for instance, makes a mistake, it all unravels, yes? And that's a little different perhaps than maybe basketball or baseball. So how does Bill and how do you use football analytics to offset that?
I think analytics on game day definitely takes a back role to what's happening in the moment. So when you hear Phil talk about what they're looking at as a game's going, the offensive and defensive coaches will be charting things, but it's not as much numerical as it is tendencies and causal effects of things. The statistical analysis in football really takes place primarily in the off season, and there's two parts of it. There's a statistical part that goes in to part of the evaluation of players and thinking about what their value should be. And when you're playing with a salary cap, as they do in the NBA as well, that needs to be a piece of how you think about what you can pay them. When you have players like offensive guards who don't really have statistics, the way you start to look at them as players is to maybe look at a body type and look at a database of how that body type has held up over time. Meaning, how often are they starters who are of a certain height and weight and build? Are they more durable or less durable, getting to your consistency point because you want to have guys on the field? And then you try to look at their intellect, their football intellect. Are they coachable? To your point, Jackie, if they don't do what they're coached to do in the moment, the other 10 people's roles can break down. And you look at trying to measure their ability intellectually through certain standardized tests that the players get, and also by going out and doing research on them with people who have worked with them in the past to see how coachable they are and how disciplined they are. And again, it's not numerical, but we have a way of taking that back and putting it into a formula that goes into a whole grouping of other things we look at and comes up with statistical analysis. But at the end of the day, if you're lucky enough to have somebody like Phil Jackson or Bill Belichick coaching your team, a lot of that, I think, is already internalized. They've seen enough football or basketball. They've played with enough guys. They know it without even seeing it on a piece of paper.
So let me just throw one at you here. So Wes Welker became a free agent last year, as you know, immensely popular player in New England, but was going to cost you a lot of money. You guys made a decision to sign Danny Amendola, and it really, in the end, Julian Edelman, I think, is the one that you plugged in, and I think he very efficiently came close to matching Wes Welker's stats. So maybe you could take us through the process of looking at those, making those decisions, and those players in particular.
I think the Wes Welker thing goes back to the start of the season before, because we weren't afraid of paying Wes. You said he was going to cost you a lot of money. We had franchised him the season before.
Right.
I think it was $11 million,
Yes.
$9 million, $11 million. And the idea was to try to work to a long-term deal. We had actually offered Wes a deal the summer before that on a 3-year basis would have left him in a financially better place than he's going to end up having been in over those 3 years. But we were willing to do that deal at a point in time where his production was at a certain level, his age was at a certain level, and he was performing as a player. When we went another year into the process, we still in our head had a value that we were able to place on the player. The player and his agent thought that their value in the open market was going to be greater. So while Wes, going back to the consistency theme, would have been our first choice, there was a dollar figure at that point that we weren't willing to go beyond, and you put insurance in place by knowing what you'll do if you can't do a deal with that player. And that involves going out and looking at the other guys in the league who are going to be free agents and available at that position. We look at their age, we look at their physical measurables, we look at their production, and we place a dollar value to all of that. And we still offered Wes, before free agency started, more than he ended up getting in the open market. But once free agency started, we went out and signed Danny because he fit a construct that worked within our system, and we couldn't take the risk of losing both Wes and Danny. So it really wasn't as much about the money. It was about trying to do a deal with Wes before free agency started. He and his agent had a view of the world that we didn't think was realistic, or I should say his agent. I don't want to say Wes. I don't know what Wes was thinking. And that's how something like that happens. And there's definitely a lot of analysis relative to other people who play that position in the league at that point in time.
So Phil, you have the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. You add Tony Kukoc, which they had a difficult time with when you first added them, those two guys. And yet you go on and you win championships with them. How do you keep, aside from the analytics of it, but how do you keep a team together? I've read I think I've read all of your books. And
It's a lot of reading.
I know, I had a lot of free time on my hands. But the philosophy of keeping a team focused, keeping them together, and you've spoken a lot about that in some of your writings.
The situation in Chicago broke down at a level in which Michael Jordan retired.
Right.
And after 3 championships there, the retirement came as quite a blow. Tony Kukoc had left Treviso in Italy to come and play with the Bulls and was not going to have that opportunity. So for him to fit in was pretty seamless and pretty easy. The problem was in the '92 Olympics that they took it out on Tony at the Olympics.
They sure did.
And Scotty, of course, understood that Tony was going to get more money than he was possibly in a contract, and so he laid the defense on him and made it very difficult for him. But it's a good wake-up call. They actually did very well together, Scotty and Tony Kukoc. What we had to do was revamp that team entirely. We took a group of champions together into the season that Michael left and had a relatively good season. We won 55 games.
Right.
And then it disbanded. John Paxson, Bill Cartwright left, Horace Grant, Scott Williams went into free agency, and we had to rebuild the team. In doing so, we had to start when Michael came back with two pieces, and Tony Kukoc and Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan, who we knew were championship quality ball players, and put players together in that sequence. Up until that time, we had used full court press in basketball. I was a believer, and still am, in pressing full court, and used two guards, B.J. Armstrong and John Paxson, almost 26, 22 minutes apiece. They flipped that role in the last championship. But the advent of the game with Shaq in our conference changed that up, so we went to a big guard situation. And the offense still works with a big guard. So we had no point guards. And we knew, having watched Steve Kerr in college, that this is the kind of player we wanted to have on our team. He was on the team, and we filled in some of the spots behind those guys, and then it came down to what are we going to do for a power forward, which was a dilemma. I wrote out a list of 7 power forwards that I thought would really help us out. Losing Horace Grant and Scott Williams was a big blow to us.
Sure.
And, you know, we went down the list. The bottom of my list was Dennis Rodman, who wasn't even a power forward at the time. He was a small forward. And we ended up with Dennis Rodman. That was the best we could do.
So let me ask you quickly, with that list of 7 players, what are you looking for? How are you listing them? Are you listing them statistically, personality, character, all of the above, I'm assuming?
Well, Coleman was at the top of the list, and you remember him at Syracuse as a terrific basketball
Yes.
player.
Derek Coleman as a Bull. Wow.
The mentality was not there as far as what we wanted, but the skills were all there. He could pass, he could shoot. He had a great rebounding capabilities, but he was locked in a pretty big contract, and he was, you know, like a franchise player at that time. So that one didn't work out. But we were looking for a player that could pass the ball defensively, could stand up to post defense, rotations,
Okay.
and could rebound. You know, that was really important. Being a playmaker in the offense that we run doesn't just start with the guards. It includes everybody, even
right.
the centers. So actually having Dennis Rodman turned out to be one of the joys of my coaching career because of his incredible athleticism and also his incredible weirdness.
Well, and his defensive tenacity, too, yeah.
He had an engine that never stopped. Unfortunately, it went into the bars a lot of times afterwards, but...
A couple wedding dresses in there, too, as I recall. So, Jonathan, how important is it, Michael Jordan, Shaq, and later Kobe, and Tom Brady in your case? Obviously, it's important to have that franchise player. How much input does Tom Brady get into your personnel decisions? A little? A lot?
On the first part of the question, I think having a core player like that or players are critical because there's a lot of other great players and great athletes who have played the game. But I think what separates the great athletes from the truly great players is that they have a burning desire and a passion to win and that they're leaders. And people like Michael Jordan, who I had the privilege of seeing a bunch, and some of the other players that Phil just named. I've seen Kobe and Shaq less, but I remember I used to watch Rodman on the Pistons, and not that he's a real leader, but he's a guy that just had a burn and a passion to win and perform. And when you have players like that on your team, it sets a tone in the locker room, especially when they're hard workers, the way Tom is, that forces everybody else to try to elevate and raise up to that level. And when we do our evaluations of kids coming out of school and guys that we want to sign on our team, the ones that have that passion, that just true passion to win at any cost, and can do it in an extroverted way that has a leadership quality that goes with it, that's incredibly valuable to us, and it's something you can't find enough of. It's the most valuable commodity that we can have in a player.
So the term Patriot way, the Patriot way was used quite a bit during that championship run, and having covered those teams and gotten to know a lot of your players like Mike Vrabel, like Teddy Bruschi, those are two of the guys in particular that I think of when we talk about the Patriot way. Not early draft picks, not superstars, but established their own sort of leadership within the locker room in concert, in step with Tom Brady. And I think, again, in football, you have offense and defense, and I think you need to have the same presence on each side of the ball.
You need leaders on both sides, and I think what Vrabel and Bruschi brought to the table, neither one will go to the Hall of Fame in Canton, but they both brought a passion and a love for the game of football that was above anything else in their lives, maybe except for their family. And it was a 24/7 passion and obsession for them, and they worked incredibly hard. If they were gonna lose, it was because someone was just dramatically better than them. They were not gonna be outworked, and they weren't gonna be outthought. And I think when Bill looked at guys like Vrabel and Bruschi, he saw guys whose passion for the game, also a byproduct of that, was that they loved to be coached, that they understood that the game of football was about those 11 players on the field at once, each doing their job to make the other people around them better and the system work. They weren't going to let their athleticism sort of take over and their instincts go tell them to do something else. They were going to stay disciplined. And when Bill and Nick, who runs our personnel department, when we're evaluating players, we try to put a statistical value on those things. You can't, it's not numerical, but we have a qualitative way of grading those intangibles that really does act like a numeric statistic, and it's what we look for in guys.
Do share.
Well, I mean, it's terminology. It's not, Nick, I think Nick, I saw Nick or I saw Dave.
Who wants to hear it? Show of hands. Who wants to hear this?
Right.
There we go.
Next year, Jessica, we should have a panel with them on the panel.
Okay. So Phil, I'm wondering, you go to Los Angeles, you have Kobe, you have Shaq. I remember Shaq telling me when he first met you, he said he turned out the lights, he wanted me to meditate, I fell asleep, I wasn't supposed to, and he wanted me to play this, he wanted me to run this triangle thing, and I didn't get it, but I thought, I have to do it because it worked. How much easier was it for you to sell the triangle and what it was trying to accomplish because you had had so much success in Chicago before with it?
It made it a lot easier. Plus, I was able to bring a coaching staff along with me.
Right.
Ron Harper also came along, who started on that team, a terrific player for us. A guy who played on a peg leg for a number of years, was still a great player, even though he had a terrible ACL injury maybe 4 or 5 years into his career.
So he's your Teddy Bruschi.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few. Bill Cartwright was on that first Dynasty, our first three-peat group we had. Bill was in Chicago. They were the Twin Towers. Patrick Ewing and Bill Cartwright were in Chicago, both #1 picks in the draft, 4 or 5 years apart. And when I got to Chicago as an assistant coach, I huddled a lot with Jerry Krause about the personnel, and I felt like Horace Grant was going to be capable of taking the power forward role. Charles Oakley was a terrific player, would be enough to bring Bill Cartwright to our team. Bill was the glue that defensively held us together. I had a drill in practice where the big guys stood on one side of the lane. The guards got the ball on the move up by the slot at the top of the key on the sideline, and they drove to the hoop, and you either took the charge or made the block. Right. It was an angle kind of thing that you try to teach players how to get to an angle. So you go through the line a couple times, and then finally it was Michael versus Bill Cartwright. And Bill was not going to let him dunk on him, but he gently eased him down to the floor after he knocked him down. I mean, he did knock him down, but he eased him down to the floor. And I think at that point, Michael had great respect for Bill. That was when he realized this guy's got a sense of toughness, and he's not going to let anything come by him, even myself, even the speed he had. So I think that was one of the things that kind of demonstrated that. So you really need those guys that are leaders. They may not be, statistical guys,
right,
huge statistical guys. that have leading capabilities. So I also brought along to LA John Sally. John Sally is more of a media personality than a player, I think, in even those days. John was a
attest to that.
7-footer who went to Miami, and Chuck Daly, expressed this thing about the fact that when John went to Miami, everybody expected him to be a 15-10 guy. He was still 8-6, and he said, when you have an 8-6, 8 points, 6 rebound a game guy, he's going to be an 8.6 rebound a game guy anyway. But we had John in Chicago at the end, and he came with me out to LA, and he was a great translator to Shaq. So, there'd be situations. One of the things I did to motivate Shaq, I'm sure you didn't write about it in your book, was that when he came off the court after 4 games, I stood him up before he got to the huddle and I said, what was the greatest thing that Wilt Chamberlain did? And Shaq likes stats. He said he averaged 50 points a game. And I said, that's pretty good, but that's not the greatest thing. Well, he had 28 rebounds a game. Right. That's terrific, but that's not the greatest thing. He played 48 plus minutes a game for the whole season. Do you think you could do that?
That is in the book. He told me that story. See, you made an impression. Isn't that nice to know? Someone made an impression on Shaq. That's pretty good. It's not easy to do.
So I played him 6 games, 48 minutes, except the blowouts. Didn't play him 48 minutes in the blowouts. Sally came to my office and said, Coach, Shaq would kind of like to have it easy. It's kind of wearing on him a little bit. But that's the reason he was an MVP that year. He got in shape. And the best
year of his career. Best year he ever had. He told me also that you used to say, hey, fatso. Right?
Never could get him on the scale, I'll tell you that.
Actually, Pat Riley made him get on the scale for the one time he won a championship there.
You had to take him to a grain elevator to get him on the scale.
So the dynamics between Shaq and Kobe obviously were challenging. It's amazing, really. But from what I understand from both of them was it never spilled over to practice or to the court. It was all the extraneous stuff after practice. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, they were just, 2 birds of a different feather. And, Kobe's got this tremendous energy that won't stop, and he works harder than anybody. Michael Jordan had a point up here where he worked hard. He was a tremendous player. He overcame a lot of deficiencies in his game. Defense, he couldn't play defense, he couldn't hit an outside shot. All those things disappeared with his work ethic. And Kobe saw that, I think, as a pinnacle that he had to reach and went beyond that, actually, in his work. Shaq didn't work at it. It was too easy, he's too big, he's too easy for him to do it. I mean...
he had other things to do, too,
yeah,
right?
He had his clown role that he had to play that's a wonderful role for him in society and his comedy group. So I think one of the things that the wedge was between them was when Shaq opted not to get an operation until right before the season, when he could have had it after the season.
Right.
And that ended up not allowing us to win 4 in a row in Kobe's mind. And that was what he really wanted to do. That would have set a bar that he felt was too high to jump over for anybody else.
Very good. So, since you guys won those championships, Jonathan, the NFL's changing, the landscape is changing very quickly, I think, with the salary cap. It's getting harder, I think, to build repeat champions. And I wonder how, since that's happened, if you agree with that, number one, and two, what changes you've seen that make it difficult to win multiple championships?
There's
a lot there.
There's
Go
a
ahead.
lot. There's a lot in that question. I think the first thing is when we won. Well, I'll go back. We bought the team in '94, and '94 was the first year of the cap, and we paid $173 million for a business which had a negative EBITDA. And the only reason we did that was because we felt that the salary cap was going to change football, and it was going to take a sport where at the time, for the prior decade almost, the Cowboys and the 49ers had been dominant because they were willing to outspend everybody. And there were a lot of teams that weren't competitive for long periods of time. And the salary cap in a league that shared virtually all of its revenue now had leveled the playing field competitively, so that you were going to compete not by how rich you were, but by how good you were at evaluating talent for your system, signing it up under the rules of the salary cap, and then coaching it. And literally, unlike any other sport, money was coming out of the equation because of our revenue sharing and because of the cap, and it was going to rely on the analytics and the intellect. And we felt like if you could find, coming from other businesses, we stepped into that, and we were surprised that traditional football people didn't get that concept. And it shows you that 20 years ago in the NFL, there literally was nothing analytical brought to the table. And what we did over the first 6 years we owned the team, we went to one Super Bowl. It was the year Belichick was with us with Parcells. But we were searching hard for somebody who had the intellectual capacity to understand the analytics, but who also had grown up in coaching and had the instincts of a great coach. And we were lucky that Bill was somebody we got exposure to, because I really believe our competitive advantage as an organization, and what we hoped to find when we bought the team at the time we did, was somebody in Bill who, because maybe people on the outside viewed him as a little bit not warm and fuzzy and wouldn't want them working with him, he actually has not only an amazing ability to coach players, but an intellectual capacity and an understanding of the salary cap and the analytics that go into it, that he can do the whole thing and tie it together. And I really believe that's what's been our competitive advantage. And I think in football, because you have a 53-man roster and 8 guys on a practice squad, so, call it, when you add in IR, call it mid to high 60s, and a third of that roster is going to turn over each year. And you have to be aware not only of the players that are coming up for free agency that year whose deals are up, but where your guys are that are 2 years out and 3 years out, that if you don't have somebody running your football team who knows how to really manage the numbers part of that roster, you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. Because if a head coach relies on a GM, you better hope that they love each other and that they can fight like brothers, but at the end of the day have a mutual respect, because the minute something goes wrong, the coach is going to say, oh, the GM gets me lousy players. Or the GM is going to say to the owner, oh, the coach, I'm giving him great guys. I mean, Phil can probably speak to it. He understands that dynamic. And I think that's where we're lucky to have Bill. And in football, if you can find a head coach who has the ability to handle the intellectual load of the cap, you have a real competitive advantage.
So, in Chicago, you and Jerry had your moments.
Oh, yeah, we worked really well together.
Those weren't the moments I was referring to, but but I mean, overall, did you have personnel arguments? Because Jerry, I know, was very hands-on, former baseball scout, prided himself in finding the Scottie Pippins and so on and so forth. So what were those discussions like for you?
We, as a staff, we used to judge talent. And we would come in after the season was over. It ended up that we ended up our seasons in mid-June at the end, or close to the draft, so we lost a lot of distance later on. But my early exposure as an assistant coach, when the Bulls were finishing in the lower ranks in the conference, we come in and we start doing analytical tape, and then we'd start working players out, and we'd take them through sessions, and then we go out to lunch with them, and then we do testing with them and check the testing scores, and then we feel maybe if we had to bring him in a second time, what is this person really like? Jerry left no stone unturned. He was not beyond knowing the family, knowing the coach, and even, finding private, investigators to investigate
Right.
something about
Not
a person's
uncommon,
life.
then.
And one of my early sessions, I wasn't the head coach yet, but we were in a position to draft a center in Stacey King. Well, there's two. One was Vlade Divac and Will Perdue. And I had information about Vlade Divac. Will Perdue was, the choice at hand from Villanova, or from Vanderbilt. And we knew that there was another center coming out until morning's class. And so the argument ensued, and I was like, we've got to take this guy, Divac, because he's got a lot of skill. I haven't seen him. We don't know him. We understand he smokes. He broke his leg. He probably was drunk. But there were all these rumors that went along that we couldn't verify.
All Europeans smoked, too. They all smoked.
So we didn't draft him, and as a result, we had, but one of the things Jerry said, if everybody thinks like I do, why should I have to hire another person if they think like I do? I want people to argue with me.
Okay.
So we argued. We had Stacey King up for draft 3 years later, 2.5 years later, and Sean Kemp was available. And, Sean Kemp had this tremendous athletic ability, and we ended up not picking him, even though I wanted him. I felt we could deal with him because we were suspicious that his background might not be the best for his skill level and get to the point where he could win a championship. So those arguments ensued over time, and they were good arguments. I think the thing that kind of broke our relationship down was situations where it became between players and Jerry, and it became difficult to kind of moderate that
Sure.
from my standpoint. So the relationship with the general manager and the coach is ultimately extremely important. The idea of having a continuing figure, role player, not a role player, star player, franchise player, is ultimately extremely important. The rest of it is about beating the bushes in all forms and fashions to find talent that go along with what you have as players. We used to look at practices as how important practices were. The group that was on before us were talking about the fact that they only had 5 practices as a Celtic team
Right.
since the New Year's. I felt practices were extremely important. And just recently on Real Sports, I watched Iverson again say, practice.
Right.
Practice. It was a practice. Practices are extremely important to teams because it builds a character. It builds that determination that goes in to a team's effort. And the second unit is prided on the fact of go out there and play. This is your game today, this practice against the first unit. Get it so they are so intensely motivated they will come back at you. This is their challenge. And those are the things that drove us. Now, when you have great players like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, they are going to go to practice and do that for you a lot of times, which saves a lot of
Right.
effort from a coach. So our chore was sometimes is to pick who's going to go against this guy in practice every day, because they're going to come out of practice defeated, and we're going to have to build them up. So we were changing 2 guards almost all the time when Michael Jordan was in Chicago.
Because he's breaking them down in practice.
Yeah, it was really, really hard for them to maintain their confidence and continue to play. So, those things, went along with it. But eventually I ended up, practicing Scottie Pippen against Michael Jordan, putting one or the other one on the second unit so they could really challenge each other in practices. So those things become extremely important to coaches and to teams. But those players that push the team forward are what make franchises, dynasties. They're what it's all about. As coaches, We're moderating that, we're monitoring that, we're pushing them there. But, you know, as Jerry Krause said to me once, look at a guy who wins 20 games may be as good a coach as you when you win 60 games. Don't let it go to your head.
Thanks, Jerry.
I never forgot it.
So, Jonathan, I wonder with Bill Belichick, and I know your father has done this at times because I've spoken to him of it, who pushes Bill Belichick? Who challenges him? I know your father does on occasion, but from what I gather, there's a lot of young coaches in there too that Bill encourages to do that. Yes.
Yeah, we were in a meeting the other day. It was just Bill and Robert and myself, and there was a lot of, I would say, pushing or what, you know, there was a lot of questioning and back and forth, and I think that happens a lot. And I think some people look at Bill's desire to hire young people as opposed to bring in lots of people who have been around the league a number of times as a sign that he wants yes men around him. And I think it's really just the opposite. I think he likes bringing in young people because he wants to train them in how he thinks about running a football team, but the young people also come in with an ability with technology, with how young people are learning today, because as a coach, you're a teacher. And I think he finds that young people can give him good insights into how to teach and explain things in a world that's evolving and moving. But by the weight of his personality, he might intimidate people, but when you're in the system, if you want to challenge him, you're encouraged to challenge him. And I think the more credibility you build up with him with a track record of doing things, he'll listen to you. But you're allowed to push back. And Bill takes it all right. He takes it all right. I think he understands what the process of learning is, and I think the perception of Bill being somebody that doesn't like that is from the outside. I think he likes fewer people in the inner circle because he would rather have fewer, more competent people in the inner circle than these wide swaths of people who maybe a good percentage of them aren't competent, but more importantly, then you start to get, the more people that are there, you start to deal with things with media leaks so that people get promoted, their interests and their profiles start to get promoted, or people start going outside the circle when they think they have to start watching their back. And I think that's why there isn't a larger group in our organization, because Bill thinks it gives us a better chance to win, not because he's afraid of people pushing back.
So Bill's, I believe, the longest tenured coach in one place in the NFL at this time. Am I correct on that?
Yeah. Yes.
So what keeps it from, I don't want to use the word stale, because if you have Tom Brady, you should never be stale. But what keeps it fresh? What keeps the franchise moving forward? What keeps the juices flowing? And I would ask you the same question afterwards, Phil, too.
Well, I mean, I think I think Bill's a competitor at his core, but I think Bill pushes forward in the nuts and bolts football side. I think our family pushes forward in a lot of things. We'll be launching a cloud-based scouting app that I think is light years ahead of anything else in the league. There was something that was pushed by us that I think will allow us to collect more data real time in the field, have the draft evaluation process done quicker and sooner, and allow the coaches, if they want to, in season, because they're trying to evaluate a position now and thinking about the next year, are there going to be guys available in the draft? In the old days, you'd have to pick up the phone and call upstairs and talk to somebody. Now, if Bill's interested, he'll be able to go to his tablet or his desktop and in a very efficient, very multimedia way, get real data instantly, but within a minute or two, be very smart on somebody. And those advances, I'd say we're in a number of technology businesses, and I think we see things in those businesses that we bring to bear in our business. And it's just a combination of things. We're adding, if you haven't been down to Gillette, we're adding another 30,000 square feet to the football operation because last offseason we sat and brainstormed about way new spaces could be used to teach and educate the game of football. at a time where contact practices are being taken out of the game, how you could do it, and just things like that. And I think if you're not driven as an organization to get that competitive advantage in every way possible, it's easy to talk about it, but you have to really want it and be thinking about it all the time. And if you are, you just keep moving forward. And Bill is somebody who I think will check out when he's not there. And I think for us, I think we'll check out. If the family isn't driven that way, we'll check out of the business too, because it's a lousy business to be in if you're not winning.
Yeah, winning cures a lot of things, doesn't it?
It's all about, in this business, it's all about winning. If you're not winning, there's plenty of other ways to make money.
So Phil, the numbers have changed, the analytics for basketball have changed dramatically since you had that Bulls team, and probably even since your last stint with the Lakers. And I wonder, I know you read, you look at things, you talk to some of the other panelists here today. What interests you about today's NBA and some of the wonderful things that are available to you from a statistical standpoint?
Well, I want to go back and just say a few things that we haven't discussed, but that are around this topic. We, in Chicago, were, had a coaxial cable run from the United Center out to the Berto Center. So we had access to satellite, and we could do it all quickly to our own monitors. We had using computers behind the bench. You couldn't have them on the bench. That's something that I think may or may not evolve into the NBA game.
Right.
Behind the bench to mark down at 6:44. I want to look at this play. I think the referee made a mistake, or that player has done that too much, and have these various sequences available to us when we went in the locker room for our short 16-minute halftime presentation. These are things that we championed, early on. Our arena had a camera at the top of the scoreboard so that we could look at the court, full court. We didn't just take television feeds, so we go in, we'd have our feeds both the top of the court. So it's not like the
Sport view, right?
Sport view rings, but still we could say cameras focusing on somebody, a home run trot, or whatever was going on after a dunk that might evade the the regular feed of a television station, because what do they actually know? And there would be a sequence of action that we had to see. What happened to that referee? Where was he? How was his spacing on that particular? So we're always out there trying to do the best that we could, and I think that that's what analytics means to me right now. Is it's giving us the best opportunity to do the job, to let these players be the best that they can be. And these organizations and fans have the best chance to win and enjoy the game. But all that being said, coaching, dynamics with players and analyzing players, and the analytics that we're going through, the next step that's going to go into sports is going to be how to build chemistry. It's how to build the chemistry. It's not about approaching people about numbers and saying, Joe Blow shoots 30% when he dribbles the ball once. If you can make him shoot it, off the dribble, make him do that because he's he's much less efficient as a shooter. It's about all those things that create the bonds within players, that they know that if Joe Blow gets beat, that they're going to be there to cover his butt. And that he has trouble with this particular player and this particular night because this is a matchup that's difficult for him. So we got to provide him a little help. It's the chemistry that tells guys exactly where this other player is going to be at this particular time on the floor, so he's there for the pass or he's there for this. All these things, yes, are the chemistry, but the other things about the nonverbal stuff that goes into sports that makes it what it's all about, are where we're kind of searching. And in my career, after being a head coach a couple years, I brought in a mindfulness stress reduction trainer from John Kabat-Zinn's group here in Boston, in George Mumford. Shaq is right. My players, and Kerr was behind it wherever he is in this auditorium, have a player, you know, with a bunch of Z's coming out of his head, sleeping in this meditation room. But we started meditating as a group. We started working on one breath, one mind, concepts. And this is the concept that, you know, we're talking about here, is about guys doing their job and where they're supposed to be, and how do we get players to this level. In coaching and sports in this day and age, and you know, in education, we're seeing autistic kids, we're seeing ADHD as a prevalent kind of lack of focus, lack of capabilities for people to be educated. And mindfulness allows people to be receptive, to be here, and to be in the here and now. And for our players, you know, it's so important to get a bad call at one end. You see players coming back, they're jawing at officials, they've lost their focus. And so for me as a coach, this was what it was about, to get those players to focus in a way in which this becomes, this now is what's important. Not what happened the last time down the court, new play, new time, a new focus. And that's the difference that it makes, I think, a lot in what we tried to do as a coaching staff in the teams that I was involved in.
Terrific. All right, we're going to actually, if I can learn how to work this. Yeah, how about that? Ah, I did it. I'm so proud of myself. Okay, we have some questions that I'll just read off of here. Okay, I guess I don't have a lot of time. I'm already getting the signal. It's like the Academy Awards, and I haven't even said my speech yet.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Jackie.
That was quite, you were wonderful. So this first one is for Phil. Phil, what's the biggest way that being a player has helped you when you became a coach?
That's a good question.
Well, there's nothing like going through a spinal fusion, you know, in your second year of playing in the NBA and being out for the next year. Then having teammates bring you along and see how you do it and challenge you to get better and get back with it, and you know, knowing the pain and the agony of recovering from injuries was probably the most important thing I learned as a player. The other thing is that there are challenges on some nights that, for whatever reason it may be, Jamal Wilkes was just a guy I couldn't guard. I mean, it was one of those crazy things. I tried all various things, the tricks I knew. My left-handed block from behind because he put that ball behind his head to shoot his shot. And, you know, there's just some things, some nights that you understand. Hey, this guy, this is just a matchup that's difficult.
It's got my number.
We'll just let it be, you know.
Right.
Funny incident, I can't even remember the kid's name. Scored 34 points on Michael Jordan in a ball game in Chicago. And we had them home and away. And the next game, Michael got 34 on him. The first half, he just had to kill this kid because he just couldn't stop him that night. There just was no way he could stop him.
That's great. Okay, Jonathan, this is a good question. 14 years after drafting Brady in the 6th round, do you think analytics have grown to the point now where the Patriots or another team would have drafted him earlier?
I gotta go back and give Bill and Scott Pioli, who were running our personnel department at the time, a little bit of credit here, because we had Drew Bledsoe on our team at the time, and we'd just given him a large contract. It was Bill's first draft. We had a lot of needs. Brady was rated pretty highly on the board, and in the 5th round, we took Brady in the 6th. In the 5th round, Bill walked over to the board, and I clearly remember this, and picked up Brady's card, and he looked at Scott, and he said, "What's Brady still doing? You know, Brady, this is too much value to be sitting here. This kid's a winner. We have too many other needs. We can't take him, can we?" You know, basically, I'm paraphrasing, and, you know, Pioli's like, "Yeah." And I remember my dad and I were standing there in the war room, and we stared at each other like, why would we think about taking a quarterback? We have all these other needs. In the 6th round, when it was about 8 picks away, 10 picks away, Bill started to get very focused on drafting Brady because I think he thought the value was just way too great. So what I would say about today, I would say Bill, I think, had an inkling, and I think it came down to the intangibles. And I think each team has its own way of evaluating players. And for a lot of people, I bet you because Tom ran a 5.2 or a 5.3 and didn't appear that athletic, he'd be off the board. I think his coachability and his passion for the game and his record as a starter, when he starts, he wins. I think that might even carry more weight other places, but I wouldn't see people thinking about him as a raw talent, as a first, second, or third round draft pick, because you start to look in the first and second and third rounds, you need to take your best guess at statistical sure things, because those players in a salary cap world, if they can come in and play like good starting veterans, but under the rookie wage scale, you have a competitive advantage. And people are always weighing the cost benefits of that. So the same Brady we've seen, I would argue, probably still, he deserves to be the first pick, but I don't know that it would happen today.
That's interesting. Analytics might have actually hurt Tom Brady.
No, I think they did.
Okay, I lost my questions here. Hold on. Phil, was there a player, maybe someone today, playing today, that you didn't get a chance to coach that you think would have really thrived in the triangle?
I just think it fits, that we have 7 principles of a sound offense, and the 7th principle is a sound offense should feature all players' individual skills. It should feature shooters' capabilities of shooting, and drivers' lanes to drive, and rebounders' opportunities to rebound, etc. So from that standpoint, I would say, Curry in Golden State reminds me of a little bit of his capabilities of shooting is just unique, and that's a real big aspect of the triangle. That's a kid that would really, I think, feature well in that kind of an offense.
Durant?
You name it. LeBron?
Sure.
Keep going.
All right. Okay, John.
How about Howard?
Yeah. Spacing, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a center.
Yeah,
Be
you
pretty
kind
good.
of almost had a shot at that.
Yeah.
We'll go right along for there. Okay. Sorry. Jonathan, do you think a coach is worth a first-round pick? Obviously, you had to give up one for Belichick. The Clippers gave up one for Doc Rivers.
I think in the context of football, an exceptional coach, at the end of the day, is probably more valuable to a team long-term than any individual player is. And if you're going to make that trade, you probably have more data on the coach than you ever could on that number 1 draft pick. And so I would say, it worked out well for us, but I would say yes. Certainly in football, I can't speak to basketball.
I think the Clippers would say that they're pretty happy with Doc Rivers at the moment. I think we have time for one more question. Is that right? So, Phil, what's the biggest way that... Oh, hold on. Sorry. Okay, this might be a hard one for you. As a coach, who is your most underappreciated player? There's probably a few of them.
Yeah, that's true. I think Tony Kukoc doesn't get a whole lot of credit right now as a talented player he was.
He was terrific.
Yeah, we mentioned Ron Harper. I have a number of players that played roles. I think Derek Fisher's gotten a lot of credit, so he probably has got the credit. And,
Brian Shaw, maybe?
yeah, Rick Fox.
Rick Fox, yep.
Rob Horry, those guys had tremendous impact. Played big in moments that were important. I think those are players that I can name right now offhand.
Jonathan Kraft and Phil Jackson. Nicely done. Thank you. You guys were great.